Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Ashish and today we'll be continuing with Module 1 Introduction. Having dealt with these meaning, scope, and significance of public administration, Wilson's view of public administration and evolution, Nicholas Henry's paradigms, and Golombiewski, having dealt with all this, now we'll move ahead with new public administration, that is NPA. So, if you haven't watched my previous videos, I strongly recommend that you do so before going ahead with this video, simply because everything is interconnected and I might use some terms which I've already dealt with in previous sessions. Links for the channel and the playlist of module 1 will be in the description below, so you can click on those and get all the previous videos till today. So starting with NPA, I have decided to break the topic into two videos. Today's session will include up to Minnowbrook Conference 2. Now there are certain Minnowbrook conferences, 3 of them. I will deal with only up to Minnowbrook Conference 2. Next video will include from Minnowbrook 3 and other miscellaneous topics along with Blacksburg Manifesto, which is a kind of hidden topic. So sit tight and enjoy the ride. Starting with NPA. So what is NPA? Now you have to understand something. When we learned about Nicholas Henry's paradigms, we saw that there was a challenge era. Before paradigm 3 there was a challenge era where thinkers challenged everything that stood before that period. Everything from rules and principles, paradigm 1, paradigm 2, everything was challenged. So that era took away the identity of public administration. A certain identity of public administration that was established in the previous years was actually lost during the challenge era, and new public administration comes close on the heels of this challenge era, and it establishes itself as a kind of solution to those challenges. So we'll look into new public administration now. NPA was the outcomes of upheavals in the society during 1950s and 60s. I already told you that there were certain challenges that were put forward by thinkers during the 1950s and 60s in the challenge era from 1938 to 1950, that if you remember. So NPA was the outcome of these upheavals in the society. It was a turning point in the evolution of public administration as a discipline. There was this old concept put forward by Woodrow Wilson, politics administration dichotomy. Woodrow Wilson put forward this. This was a major theme of paradigm 1, if you remember correctly. So these principles of politics administration dichotomy and others were completely rejected by new thinkers, and it caused concern to scholars in both political science and public administration in both the streams. Politics administration dichotomy तो रिजेक्ट किया ही, प्लस पॉलिटिक्स और एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन दोनों के स्कॉलर्स को it caused concerns कि this dichotomy is not serving us better. You cannot just separate politics and administration into two watertight compartments. So politics administration dichotomy came into question. They argued that unless the two disciplines mix freely, as I told you, they argued that unless the two disciplines mix freely without losing their identities, understanding of government would be lopsided. So they argued for doing away with this dichotomy, losing this dichotomy concept as a whole, and considering politics and administration as related to each other, though not interfering with each other but related to each other. So in the late 60s, what happened was, in the view of these rejections of old principles, some of the best of the younger generation of American scholars, they pioneered a new movement. And what was this movement? It was NPA, New Public Administration. So this is how NPA was born in the late 1960s. The young academics were sensitive to the failings of American democracy. Now, how did American democracy fail? We'll see that in the upcoming slides. Just for now, just understand that there were some failings of American democracy, and young academics were not happy with that. So the scholars gathered at Minnowbrook. Minnowbrook is a place under the leadership of Dwight Waldo. We have seen this while dealing with paradigms of public administration, Nicholas Henry's paradigms. I have told you about Dwight Waldo in very brief. So new public administration is all about Dwight Waldo, because new public administration as such started with the conference at Minnowbrook. This is the Minnowbrook Conference 1, and the leader of this conference was Dwight Waldo. So whatever the values of new public administration that we learn were actually decided at the Minnowbrook Conference 1, and the ideas and resolutions that were put forward at this conference were nothing but the ideas of Dwight Waldo among others. So what these scholars did was they gathered at Minnowbrook under the leadership of Dwight Waldo, and they challenged the givens of orthodox public administration. In paradigms of public administration, we learned that paradigm 2 was called as orthodox public administration. Why was it called orthodox? Because thinkers of those times stuck to the rules, stuck to the principles. They did not want to consider anything else. जो लिखा हुआ है वैसे ही करेंगे. They stuck to the rules, so that is why they were called as orthodox. So they challenged the givens of orthodox public administration. They challenged the rules which they stuck to. They challenged those principles. They challenged those givens of old public administration, which was orthodox in nature. These are also turbulent times. We'll see how it was turbulent in the upcoming slides. So we'll see how the American democracy failed, how the times were turbulent. We'll see this in the upcoming slides. So because of the turbulent times that the scholars were seeing, the scholars demanded restoration of values. They demanded public purpose in government. What is restoration of values? Because old public administration only cared for rules and principles. They did not care about values at all. They always thought that values were something which can be done away with. So human emotions, human values were not considered by them. So young scholars of NPA demanded restoration of these values. They demanded that public purpose should be there in government. Government should work only for people. Government should work only for the welfare of public. Wallace Sire, as we have already seen, paradigm 3, after challenge era came paradigm 3. So paradigm 3 was the era when public administrators went back to political science. So Wallace Sire commented on that period. He said that public administration is ultimately a problem in political theory. This was a practice question for you in that paradigm lecture. If you had practiced this, you must be knowing about it. Public administration is ultimately a problem in political theory was the statement of Wallace Sire. And some other administration scholars, as we saw in paradigms 4, went towards management. Paradigm 3 was public administration as political science. Paradigm 4 was public administration as management. So management oriented public administration curriculum was also found irrelevant. तो सब कुछ irrelevant हो गया था. So this is how NPA was born, because political theory in alone itself would not serve public administration's purpose, and management on its own could not serve public administration's purpose. Everything was found as irrelevant, and that is how your new public administration or NPA was born. Moving ahead, now new public administration stood for something new. So what did your old public administration or traditional public administration signify? There were some particular features of traditional public administration which the scholars of NPA were against. So what were these features? The objective of traditional public administration was always efficiency and economy, and for this efficiency and economy they said that we should always follow the rules, we should always follow the principles. They were orthodox in nature. So because of that they neglected all the human emotions. So you can see no place for human relations. It was all rationality oriented. आपको rational होना चाहिए. सिर्फ आपको there should be scientific management as advocated by Taylor. There should be ideal bureaucracy as advocated by Max Weber. So everything was rules oriented and principles oriented. So objective was efficiency and economy. It was a closed system of organization. What do you mean by closed system of organization? It did not deal with the outside society. There were some changes happening in the society. There were some changes happening in the environment as a whole, but public administration did not respond to those changes. So it was a closed system of organization. It was a mechanistic model. Mechanistic model means it had no place for human emotions and values, no place for human relations. Emphasis on principles and structures and rules, and did not emphasize on human emotions. It was rationality oriented, rules and regulations. It had an impersonal order. This idea was given by Max Weber. He said that bureaucrats should be impersonal. Impersonal means they should not bring in their personal values. They should not bring in their personal morals and personal ethics in decision making. They should be impersonal in nature. So this is what traditional public administration stood for. One more thing it stood for was positivism. Now I am planning to make a separate video on positivism, modernism and neo modernism if I get time. But in short, what positivism means was positivist thought or positivism, what it means is true knowledge or positive knowledge can only be acquired by scientific reasoning. You cannot put everything on superficial and supernatural powers or God or theology. True knowledge can be obtained only by following scientific reasoning and scientific thoughts. So this was the positivist era. Now remember one thing, before positivist era all the phenomena was always linked to God. If an earthquake happened, people said it was an act of God. If a flood happened, people said it was an act of God. Then came the Renaissance. Renaissance, if you would have studied in world history, Renaissance is the period where people said that there should be reasoning, there should be reason behind everything. We should look at everything not relating it with God but with reason. So there should be scientific principles behind everything. This was the positivist era. Remember this positivist era. So this was what traditional public administration stood for. It stood for efficiency and economy, rules and regulations, rationality and positivism. That means adherence to scientific values and scientific reasons. So what did new NPA suggest? It suggested a post-positivist era. New public administration lies in a post-positivist era. Post-positivist era is an era where thinkers challenged the positivist theory. They said that what has your scientific outlook given us so far? It has given us two world wars. It has given us nuclear weapons, and all the destruction and pain in the world has happened because of following your scientific outlook. So we should shun this scientific outlook. We should not look at everything being related to science anymore. Yes, science is important, but not everything should be related to rationality and scientific reasons. So this was what thinkers in post-positivist era believed in. So as you can see by name, it is post-positivist, which comes after positivism. So new public administration as such lies in this post-positivist era. It is obviously post-behavioral, as you would have learnt in paradigms of public administration, Nicholas Henry's paradigms. I have told you what behavioralism means. So obviously new public administration was in post-behavioral era. Who were the two main thinkers that we learned about in paradigms which were related to behavioralism? They were Herbert Simon and Robert A. Dahl. And new public administration thinkers challenged that old thought. Everything before them was traditional. So behavioralism was traditional. They stood for post-behavioralism. They stood for post-positivism. NPA was also phenomenology based. What is phenomenology based? Value and fact mixed. As we have seen, there were no importance given to values, human values and human emotions. So NPA tried to achieve the mixture of value and facts. It was phenomenology based. Public policy oriented. Welfare of people should be the prime importance. Social equity approach. Equality and equity should be in the society. This was all that new public administration stood for. Post-positivist, post-behavioral, phenomenology based, public policy oriented and social equity approach. It was against all these ideas of traditional public administration. Now we'll look at some reasons of emergence of NPA. So as we have already seen, traditional public administration, TPA, traditional public administration emphasized on administration rather than public. Public were ignored. It was not considered important to provide welfare to people. So administration was emphasized on rather than public. Principles and procedures were emphasized on rather than values. We saw that already. Efficiency and economy was emphasized on rather than effectiveness. Under such an approach, public administration was losing its relevance to the society because there were new challenges that were coming every day and every year. So it was losing its relevance, to so to say. So there was also a gap in theory. Why was the gap in theory? Because as we have seen, basic foundation of TPA, the basic foundation of traditional public administration was dichotomy concept, dichotomy of politics administration, public private similarity, science of administration, and all these were basic foundations. So there was a gap in theory. Why? Because new public administration challenged all this. It said that in today's times these are not relevant at all. So there is a gap in theory. Theory does not stand for what we are looking at in current times. There was also a gap in practice. As we have already seen in previous slides, these were turbulent times in USA. And why were these turbulent times? During the 1960s, there were black riots happening all over the country. There were youth protests because of unemployment. Vietnam War was catching hold on slowly and steadily. So these were very turbulent times. Nuclear weapons were being built every day. Cold War was at its height. So these were turbulent times, and traditional public administration TPA was unable to respond to these turbulences effectively. So that is what gave rise to NPA. These are the reasons we are seeing, right? Honey report on higher education. There was this one report on higher education which said that institutional shortcomings were prevalent in the entire United States. Honey report on higher education highlighted the institutional shortcomings of higher education institutions. It also emphasized on lack of communication between scholars and practicing administrators. Scholars said something different. They said to stick on rules and principles, and practicing administrators found it difficult to manage it in the changing time. So there was a lack of communication between scholars and practicing administrators. There was also one Philadelphia conference on theory and practice of public administration. Now this conference is what gave rise to a call for administrators to play a greater role in reducing social inequalities. It was the basic job of administrators to reduce social inequalities, to eliminate social ills of society. So this Philadelphia conference on theory and practice of public administration emphasized that. It asked to move away from police state to welfare state. What is welfare state and police state? We saw this in previous lectures. Welfare state is where government take care of people. Police state is nothing but laissez-faire, where free hand is given to private institutions and strict law and order is maintained. This is what is police state. So a call was given to administrators to play a greater role in reducing social inequalities, and also to move away from police state to welfare state. Also, as we saw in paradigm 4, traditional public administration had come to be dominated by management concepts, and it has lost connections with its mother discipline, political science. So new public administration was a call to bring back those people who had went towards management science, because management concepts were found to be increasingly irrelevant for the changing times. So traditional public administration came to be dominated by management concepts and lost connections with its mother discipline. And NPA aimed at bringing political science and pub closer. Do away with dichotomy. Political science and public administration should be brought closer without losing the separate identity of public administration. So remember, these were the reasons why NPA rose during the 1960s, or rather late 1960s. So we'll come to our first Minnowbrook Conference, which is what gave rise to our new public administration. Now remember, while we'll be studying Minnowbrook Conference 1, we'll also be studying what actually new public administration means, because this is the first time where new public administration was given a call for, right? So when we study MB1 or Minnowbrook Conference 1, we will also study what new public administration actually means. So this conference was held in 1968. Now remember, every Minnowbrook conference is held at an interval of 20 years. So first conference in 1968, second conference was in 1988, third conference was after 20 years, that is 2008. So moving ahead with Minnowbrook Conference 1. So as we have already seen, Minnowbrook Conference 1 was a call to review the study and practice both, the theory and practice both of public administration in terms of changing environment, changing times. There were turbulent times. American democracy was seen to be failing in these turbulent times. So Minnowbrook Conference called for review of the study and practice both of public administration in these changing environments. Younger scholars gathered at Minnowbrook at Syracuse University under the leadership of Dwight Waldo. We already saw that they challenged the givens, they challenged the rules of orthodox or old public administration. And what were these givens? Dichotomy, public private similarity, science of administration, and all those things. Major themes that were discussed in conference were relevance of public administration. How is public administration relevant in today's times, in these turbulent times of 1960s? This relevance was discussed. Morality and ethics in public administration should be considered. This was also a major theme. Social equity should be considered. This was also a major theme. Reconciling public administration and democracy. Anti-positivism, as we saw, they were post-positivist thinkers, they were against positivism, so anti-positivism was also a major theme discussed in this conference. Also, there were 4 goals and 3 anti-goals. We'll see about these in next slide. So 4 goals or 4 themes, as we say, were relevance or values and equity and change. So first goal that we'll learn about is relevance. Relevance is more of an reinterpretation than an original quest. Why is this so? Because they sought to define how public administration is relevant in changing times. They did not try to define the relevance as such, they tried to change the relevance of public administration in changing times. So it was more of a reinterpretation than original quest. These were turbulent times. American democracy has failed to keep up with these turbulent times. So it was a reinterpretation of relevance of public administration. Traditional public administration was interested in efficiency and economy. As we saw, they did not focus on values and emotions. The new public administration movement discovered that the discipline, the strictness, that this discipline had little to say about contemporary problems and issues of black riots, Vietnam War, Cold War, and everything. So traditional public administration was insufficient to deal with these issues. So this was what was discussed in relevance, that traditional public administration is irrelevant in today's times. Management oriented public administration was also found to be irrelevant. Another aspect of relevance was they asked various questions, and these questions as a whole form your another aspect of relevance. So what were these questions? Public administration knowledge is for what? क्या पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन का काम होता है पॉलिटिकल पावर को परपेचुएट करना? एज यू कैन सी द सेकंड क्वेश्चन इज इट द पर्पस ऑफ पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन टू फैसिलिटेट द यूज ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव नॉलेज फॉर परपेचुएशन ऑफ पॉलिटिकल पावर? क्या पॉलिटिकल पावर को परपेचुएट करना ही काम होता है? दीज वर सम ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस रेज्ड ड्यूरिंग मिनोब्रुक कॉन्फ्रेंस 1. व्हाट स्टैंडर्ड्स ऑफ डिसीजंस डू वी यूज टू मेक डिसीजंस? हु डिफाइंस आवर क्वेश्चंस एंड प्रायोरिटीज फॉर अस? व्हाट आर द यूजेस ऑफ पब-एड एज अ सोशल एंड पॉलिटिकल साइंस? So these were some important questions that were raised during Minnowbrook Conference 1, and this is what defines your another aspect of relevance. How is public administration relevant in the face of these questions, these particular questions? These were obviously very disturbing questions, challenging the status quo in public administration. एक status quo reach हो चुका था public administration में during paradigm 1 and paradigm 2, as we had saw in paradigms of Nicholas Henry. So these were obviously very disturbing questions which challenged the status quo in public administration. What new public administration demanded was radical curriculum change. एक रेडिकल करिकुलम चेंज की ज़रूरत है, बिकॉज टाइम्स हैव चेंज्ड सो मच दैट traditional public administration is not relevant anymore. So we need a radical curriculum change to facilitate meaningful studies. So this is what the theme of relevance that was discussed during Minnowbrook Conference 1. We'll move on to our next goal or next theme, that is values. Now, as we had seen that traditional public administration did not consider values at all. They always stuck to rules, they always stuck to principles. So what new public administration did was it openly rejected the value neutral position taken by behavioral political science and management oriented pub-ed, जो पैराडाइम 4 और पैराडाइम 3 में जो हुआ था और पैराडाइम 1-2 में भी हुआ था. So new public administration rejected all those value neutral positions. They said that values were important and values should be considered. Value neutrality in PubEd is an impossibility, they said. There cannot be public administration with value neutrality. Value neutrality should be rejected. Value neutrality is an impossibility. And the work of the discipline is to work for disadvantaged sections of society. The discipline should explicitly espouse the cause of the disadvantaged sections of the society. जो अंडर प्रिविलेज सेक्शंस हैं, जो डिसएडवांटेज सेक्शंस हैं सोसाइटी में, उनके लिए पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को काम करना चाहिए. And this is not possible by sticking to value neutrality. We need human values, we need morals, we need ethics, and that is only when we can work for disadvantaged sections of society. This is what scholars of NPA suggested during MB1, Minnowbrook Conference 1. They said that in our eagerness to make public administration scientific and rational, we had adhered to concept of value neutrality. What this means was, traditional public administration prospered in an era of positivism. तो वहाँ पे हर चीज़ को साइंटिफिक आउटलुक से देखा जाता था, साइंटिफिक एंड रैशनल आउटलुक. सो इन आर ईगरनेस टू मेक पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन साइंटिफिक एंड रैशनल, इन आर ईगरनेस टू adhere to positivism, we had adhered to the concept of value neutrality, and this has proved to be dysfunctional to both public administration as well as the society. The next goal or theme we would be looking at is equity. Equity is nothing but equality and justice for all in society. All disadvantaged sections and underprivileged sections should be looked upon for. That is nothing but equity. What NPA found was that social equity is important for human development. अगर human development करना है तो social equity होनी चाहिए. अगर equity नहीं है society में तो human development would be futile. It called upon administrators to become champions of underprivileged sections of society. As we had seen in the previous slide of values, underprivileged sections of society should be the priority of public administration. So it called upon the administrators to become the champions of these underprivileged sections of society and asked them to display open partisanship. What does partisanship mean? Taking sides, being partisan to someone, taking sides. So there are two views of partisanship. One is political partisanship. We are not talking about political partisanship here. Public administrators or bureaucrats as such should be politically neutral. They should not show any political partisanship. The partisanship that we are talking about here is partisanship towards the society. They should display open partisanship towards the society as a whole and especially underprivileged sections. So they should become champions of underprivileged sections of society and display open partisanship in policy making. It aimed to set up an egalitarian society, an equity and equality based society. It aimed to set up an egalitarian society. To make PubEd more proactive. What is proactive? Anticipating something in future and working towards stopping it from happening. That is what is proactiveness. So it asks public administration to be more proactive to measure social issues to changing times. Next goal or theme is change. Now remember, equity and change go hand in hand. If you want to bring social equity, if you want to bring equity in society, society as a whole should be changed, right? So equity and change always go hand in hand. Change is to serve the cause of social equity, is to actively work for social change. As I said, social equity and social change go hand in hand. So these third goal or and the fourth goal are synonymous in nature, because to serve the cause of social equity, अगर social equity लानी है तो we have to actively work for social change. This is the motto of new public administration. The attack is on status quo and against the powerful interests entrenched in permanent institutions. We have to dismember these powerful interests that have entrenched themselves in permanent institution. What are these powerful interests? The bureaucrats that have assumed too much power to themselves, the politicians that have assumed too much power to themselves. This is what the attack of new public administration is on. They should be responsive to changes occurring in society. So MB1 scholars, Minnowbrook 1 conference, के जो स्कॉलर्स थे, they explored ways of institutionalizing this change. The change they were proposing, they explored ways of institutionalizing this change and remedying the bureaucratic tendencies of big organizations. So जो bureaucratic tendencies होती हैं, red tapeism. What is red tape? Red tape means sticking to rules. For example, if you have to pass a file through a bureaucrat, that bureaucrat will make your life very difficult for passing that file, saying that these are the rules that you have to follow. ये check होना चाहिए, ये check होना चाहिए, ये check होना चाहिए. These rules should all be checked, and that is only when I will pass the file. So too much of sticking to rules is red tapeism. Red tapeism is one of the bureaucratic tendencies. These bureaucratic tendencies happen when bureaucrats assume too much power to themselves and they ignore the social welfare and the public policy approach. So what Minnowbrook Conference, one scholar said that we should remedy this bureaucratic tendencies of big organizations. Now we have seen what the 4 goals stood for. 3 anti-goals was something that was suggested by Robert Golembiewski. We had already seen Robert Golembiewski in video 1.2 part 1, right? He gave us 4 phases of evolution of public administration. He also said that NPA or new public administration had 3 anti-goals. So what these 3 anti-goals were? First was anti-positivist. We already saw that, right? NPA stood for anti-positivism. They stood for rejection of value-free approach, साइंटिफिक आउटलुक, रैशनल आउटलुक, ये सब को छोड़ दो. एंटी पॉजिटिविज्म मीन्स which is against positivist thought of public administration. It rejects the value-free approach of traditional public administration. It rejects the rationalist view of humankind. Emotions and values should also be considered, and it should not always be rational and scientific outlook. It was anti-technical. Anti-technical means it was more of a machine and system, right? So what they said was, new public administration scholars said that emotive and creative mankind was being sacrificed for the logic of machine and system. It's the one and the same thing. Emotions and values were sacrificed. So NPA was anti-technical in nature. The technicality should not be stuck with all your life. So it should be anti-technical. The emotive and creative mankind in traditional public administration was being sacrificed, right? So they were against that. It was anti-technical. It was anti-bureaucratic. Now anti-bureaucratic does not mean they were against bureaucrats or bureaucracy. They were against the bureaucratic tendencies. They were against the bureaucrats who assume too much power to themselves. So they were anti-bureaucratic and anti-hierarchical. Anti-hierarchical also means the same thing, that too much of sticking to structures and rules and principles was not good in the changing times. So they were anti-hierarchical and anti-bureaucratic. What this means is they rejected the rigid top-down administration approach. जो rigid top-down administration approach होती है उसको reject किया and replaced it with more flatter and more decentralized approach where everyone had an equal say in decision making. So these were the 3 anti-goals as given by Robert Golembiewski. These are anti-positivist, anti-technical and anti-bureaucratic and anti-hierarchical. Moving ahead, we have another thinker named Fredrickson. What he thought about new public administration, we will see. He gave us something of a quote to remember by. I have prepared this table out of that quote so that it is easier to remember. New public administration, according to Fredrickson, was less generic and more public. It was less descriptive and more prescriptive. These are very simple terms, okay? It was more of public. It was concerned with more of public. It was less of general in nature. जो general rules and principles होते हैं उनको avoid किया. It was more of public in nature. It was less of descriptive in nature. New public administration did not describe कि ये rules follow करो, ये principle follow करो. It was more of prescriptive in nature. It was less institution oriented. It was more client impact oriented. Who were the client here? The people, the subjects were the client here. So it was more of client impact oriented and less of institution oriented. एक ideal type bureaucracy ही achieve करनी है. This was not the goal of new public administration. It was less neutral and more normative, and it was no less scientific. It was post positivism. It was anti positivist, but it was no less scientific. So it was against all of these. It was against institution, it was against descriptions, but it was no less scientific. There was some science of reason behind it. New public administration according to Fredrickson was second generation behavioralism. What is behavioralism? We saw that in paradigms lecture. Behavioralism is when thinkers started to study the behaviors of administrators, the actions, the acts of administrators. So new public administration was against that, right? It was against behavioralism. It was against anything that old public administration stood for. It was against anything that the orthodox public administration stood for. So it was against behavioralism as such, but in itself it was a second generation of behavioralism, because now they studied the behaviors according to the changing needs and the people of the society. So it was second generation behavioralism. This is what Fredrickson believed. Also, if you will see, Fredrickson said that it was less neutral and more normative, right? Normative. What is normative? Normative means defining the norms, not the specific rules and procedures, but the norms of the society, especially behaviors. Okay, normativism especially deals with behaviors. So it was in a sense second generation behavioralism according to Fredrickson. So moving ahead, our Minnowbrook Conference 1 is actually over. Moving ahead with Minnowbrook Conference 2 now. Minnowbrook Conference 2, as we saw, was in 1988, 20 years after MB1. So why was this conference held? Because times had changed. It was a period of 20 years that had elapsed and some new challenges that had occurred. So to compare and contrast these changing epochs of MB1, MB2 was organized. Environmental context was different from MB1. Why? Privatization, contracting out, globalization, these terms were catching vogue, these terms were being used more and more. So environmental context was different from MB1. MB1, Minnowbrook Conference 1, challenge to public administration. That it was a challenge to public administration. In what way? To become more proactive, as we saw in previous slides, right? Minnowbrook Conference 1 challenge that you should become more proactive with respect to new social issues and turbulent challenges that were appearing. But Minnowbrook 2 on the other hand was not so much of challenge. It retracted from this action perspective. It did not stick to that change karo. It retracted from that action perspective, and it moved towards more cerebral examination. It became more practical in nature, to so to say. As you can see, Minnowbrook Conference 1 was radical and confrontational in nature. It was very radical. It opposed everything that old public administration stood for. It challenged the public administration as a whole in light of the new challenges that had occurred. So it was much radical in nature and much confrontational in nature. Minnowbrook Conference 2 on the other hand was more practical in nature, and it was respectful to the seniors in the profession. They did not discredit all the seniors. They did not say that Woodrow Wilson ने जो बोला गलत है, मैक्स वेबर ने जो बोला गलत है, जो सब ने बोला है वो गलत है. Minnowbrook Conference was not such radical. It was respectful towards the seniors in the profession. Now there were some similarities between Minnowbrook 1 and Minnowbrook 2, and there were many differences too. So first we'll look at what were some of the similarities between both the conferences. Now some of the topics of Minnowbrook 1 also found place in Minnowbrook 2. So there was a kind of continuity in the interest. What were these topics? Ethics, social equity. We saw this happened in Minnowbrook 1 also, right? So ethics, social equity, human relations पे ध्यान दो, values पे ध्यान दो, not only on rules, reconciling public administration and democracy, and all these were the themes which were common to both Minnowbrook 1 and Minnowbrook 2. And among these, social equity was a major continuity theme. It was a major theme that also featured in Minnowbrook Conference 2. As you can see, concern for social equity was a big similarity between MB1 and MB2. Democratic values होनी चाहिए. First of all, they argued for values and also for democratic values, because administration is nothing if you are against democracy as a principle, so there should be democratic values in public administration. There should not be over bureaucratization, क्योंकि अगर over bureaucratization हो जाता है, if bureaucrats assume too much power to themselves, then democracy loses its relevance. So there should be democratic values in public administration. Was also a similarity between MB1 and MB2. Centrality of public administration. Public administration should be central to all the problems of the society, to all the social issues, social ills, and the changing turbulent times. It should be central to everything. It should respond to everything. So democratic values and centrality of public administration was also a similarity. Acceptance of heterogeneous nature of workforce in response to social diversity. The society as a whole is diverse, and our workforce should also be heterogeneous to respond to this diversity, and acceptance of this fact. This was the similarity between MB1 and MB2. Need for interaction between generalists and specialists. Who are generalists? Who take care of everything, like your IAS officer. They can be posted to any department, so IAS are kind of generalists. So need for interaction between generalists and specialists. Public administration to become more relevant discipline to solve the problems of the society. Relevance was a topic in MB1, and it was also a topic in MB2. How to increase the relevance of public administration in changing times was the similarity of MB1 and MB2. Now many differences were there in MB1 and MB2. We'll see what these differences were. Composition was wider. Scholars were from various fields like history, economics, sociology, law, polity. हर फील्ड से स्कॉलर आए थे. Every field was included in Minnowbrook Conference too. So the composition was wider. What this wider composition achieved was, it was acknowledged that the need for public administration to have interlinkages with other discipline. Public administration cannot stand aloof. It cannot stand with dichotomy and other such stuff. It should have interlinkages with other disciplines without losing its separate identity. This is what wider composition achieved. Also, difference was in inclusion of some of the themes that were not so prominent in first conference. What were these themes which were different? Leadership themes, constitutional and legal perspective, technology policy, and economic perspectives. These were not discussed during Minnowbrook Conference 1. They only focused on what should be the change, how should public administration respond to these changes. They did not focus on the leadership values, the constitutional aspects, the legal perspectives, and technologies that should be used, because technology was on a rise during 1980s and 1970s. It was not such a big phenomena during the Minnowbrook Conference 1. So inclusion of these themes were different from Minnowbrook 1. Minnowbrook 1, as we have seen, was radical and confrontational. And 2 was more practical and respectful to the seniors in profession. Minnowbrook 2 also emphasized on short-term goals and vision instead of long-term vision, which Minnowbrook 1 focused on. Minnowbrook 2 focused on short-term goals and visions, जो achieve कर सकते हैं in the short run, which is achievable. Minnowbrook 1 was more radical. The visions of Minnowbrook 1 were not achievable as such. It was more of confrontational and radical in nature. Minnowbrook 2 emphasized on something which could be achieved in a short term. So it had a short term goal and vision. It recognized that external environment is highly complex and meaningful long term vision is neither desirable, क्योंकि society is changing on a very large scale. तो अगर हम long term vision लेंगे तो it would not be meaningful or desirable anymore, because external environment is highly complex and it is highly dynamic. Minnowbrook 2 recognized that it is not possible for public administration alone to set up an egalitarian society. जैसा Minnowbrook 1 ने बोला था कि we have to equity was one of the goals or themes of Minnowbrook Conference 1. They said that we have to set up an egalitarian society. Minnowbrook 2 said that पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन अकेला इगैलिटेरियन सोसाइटी सेटअप नहीं कर सकता. इट कैन ओनली रिड्यूस इनइक्वालिटी, ठीक है, लेकिन एलिमिनेट नहीं कर सकता उसको ऑल टुगेदर. इट कैन ओनली रिड्यूस इनइक्वालिटी. अगर आप एक कम्प्लीटली इगैलिटेरियन सोसाइटी सेटअप करने की बात कर रहे हो, मिनोब्रुक 2 कैन नॉट अचीव दैट. सो दैट इज हाउ मिनोब्रुक 2 was more practical in nature. Instead of just giving up theories, it was more practical in nature, and it recognizes drawbacks too.
So Minnowbrook 2 focused on personal policies. What is personal policies? The bureaucrats and administrators, उनके जो पर्सनल पॉलिसीज एंड क्वालिटीज़ हैं, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लीडरशिप हैं, उन पे फोकस किया. मिनोब्रुक 1 गेव अ कॉल फॉर गट्सी ब्यूरोक्रेट्स, गट्स होने चाहिए. मिनोब्रुक 2 गेव कॉल फॉर कैपेबल ब्यूरोक्रेट्स, ब्यूरोक्रेट्स शुड बी कैपेबल. सो दे फोकस्ड ऑन पर्सनल पॉलिसीज. Also, technology could be used, but technology cannot be idealized as necessary tool. These were the times when, as I said, technology was on a rise. So technology as a theme was discussed in Minnowbrook Conference 2. It was not discussed in Minnowbrook 1. And while discussing this, they said that technology could be used, but it cannot be idealized as a necessary tool, because technology as a zenith of what we see today, it was not realized back then. It was only in its nascent stage. So they were very skeptical, they were very critical of technology. So they discussed it, they said that it could be used, but it should not be idealized. It is neither a necessary condition nor a sufficient condition for success, they said. It was argued that good old public administration will never go out of fashion. कितनी भी technology ले आओ, good old public administration will never go out of fashion. And this is how they were respectful towards the seniors in the profession. Even with all the technology at his command, a purely trained and unmotivated civil servant would be insensitive and corrupt. आप कितनी भी टेक्नोलॉजी रख लो, अगर उसको ट्रेन नहीं किया है और इफ ही इज अनमोटिवेटेड, ही विल बी करप्ट, ही विल बी insensitive. So technology could be used, but it cannot be idealized. This is what was the differences between MB1 and MB2. So we have done with Minnowbrook conferences 1 and 2. Now moving ahead with Minnowbrook conference 3, what I'll do is I'll end this lecture here, and from Minnowbrook conference 3 and other miscellaneous topics along with Blacksburg conference, I'll take up in the next session. Now Blacksburg manifesto is one of the hidden topics which is not directly mentioned, neither are Minnowbrook conferences, but Blacksburg manifesto is an important part of new public administration. What happens is Blacksburg manifesto is not given in any of the books, so I have included that in my material, and we will be seeing that in the next session. So if you do not want to miss any of my upcoming videos, please subscribe to the channel, and links for my channel and playlist would be in the description of this video. Go ahead and watch all the previous videos if you haven't done yet. Next session on Minnowbrook conference 3 and other aspects of NPA would be coming up very soon. Thank you for watching this. Please like and comment on the video, and also share if you like the way I teach. Thank you. Peace out.